Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing, and the first thing I've been thinking about is how the United States and Israel really must work together to stop Iran from obtaining their nuclear objectives and their other nefarious goals and objectives. Much ink has been spilled about great leaders and the myriad of ways in which they have shaped history. The reality is that great leaders are standouts. They are the exception. While most leaders think themselves to be great, delude themselves into believing that they are great, they are not, and history bears this out. It's our job, the public, to live within the confines of the capabilities of whichever leader is in place and in power at a given time. It's the job of the leader to do no harm, to leave office having not ruined the situation that they inherited, certainly to not undo the good that they inherited. Most leaders are simply custodians, glorified custodians, and then there are others. There are, even today, leaders whose model is to threaten and destroy other countries, while once upon a time, that nefarious goal was achieved through military attacks and warring and battles and those kinds of things. That has become a distant secondary force to be employed. The methods of choice today are economic hardships and cyber warfare. Iran, Russia, and China have opted to use these computer skills as their effective way to attack their enemies. For their modus operandi, in thwarting enemy countries, the United States has chosen economic power. The world is changing quickly, and it's not all bad news. All is not lost. There is a system of checks and balances in the world, and these checks and balances act as forces to help keep good strong and rein in the forces of evil. This should not be understood as a sermon or a judgment, but rather as an axiom. A primary goal in Iran, Russia, and China is to destroy first the United States and then expand their influence to the entire Western world. After that is accomplished, they will turn on each other. That makes sense. This has become their objective, not simply because the United States is their polar opposite, the antithesis of everything they represent, or because the United States is individually and collectively in conflict with each of them. It is actually because the United States is the sole power stopping these countries from advancing their mission to control the world. In the context of this larger conflict, there are important constants that must be maintained and understood. Paramount among them is that historically and politically certain nations are ironclad allies. These alliances are like marriages. And while there may sometimes be disagreements, even heated disagreements, those disagreements should never reach the level of divorce. When joined together, those allies create a bulwark against their enemies. In other words, the Western World Alliance is the bulwark against the objectives of countries like Iran, Russia, and China. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, but I'm doing it deliberately. I want to make this point absolutely clear and understood. Obviously, each country is different and needs to be dealt with or handled differently. While Iran, Russia, and China are similar enough and share enough, especially vis-a-vis their objectives and their enmity for the United States, they can often be lumped together as one threatening alliance. There are also nuanced differences that must be dealt with. So too, the Western Alliance, on some occasions, can and should be divvied up. Iran is a clear and present danger. There's no question about it. Looming larger with the passage of time. Literally almost every single day, it's more and more dangerous. The election of Ibrahim Raisi as their new president, assuming office in mid-August, only adds to the danger. The bulwark that can best now keep Iran in check is the alliance between Israel and the United States, with the new prime minister and new president, respectively, at the helm. Blocking Iran from progressing on their mission is more than the right thing to do. For the sake and safety of Israel, and for the best interests of the United States around the world, it is a matter of life and death. New Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett will certainly be invited to the White House very soon. His arrival on Pennsylvania Avenue will be celebrated, the subtext of which will be from both men's perspective, the departure of Bibi Netanyahu and that celebration. And while there are many issues upon which Biden and Bennett disagree, especially Palestinian statehood and settlements, they are in concert on the biggest issue. And the biggest issue is, of course, Iran. Israel is purportedly already successfully launched an attack against Iranian labs that produce nuclear centrifuges. The attack took place at the time the Iranian election was taking place, and while the P5+1 was actually meeting with Iran in Vienna. Interestingly, Iran reports that they repelled that attack. If the attack was successful, it significantly set back the Iranian timeline for uranium enrichment, stopping the ticking clock and lending the rest of the world a bit of breathing room and the time to find other solutions. Biden and his team want to return to the infamous 2015 nuke deal. Saying that Israel is opposed is an understatement, but that does not diminish the strength of their alliance. It means that they must constructively and creatively and decisively come up with a solution. And then, if they really do change the course of history, they might rightfully assume places as great leaders. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an editorial from the Jerusalem Post. It was posted on June 27th, 2021. It's entitled, "The Importance of Standing with Surfside," editorial. Subtitled, "Shai rightly noted that his visit sends a powerful message about the relationship between Israel and American Jewry being a two-way street." The Jerusalem Post correctly explains how important it is for both Israel and for American Jews to stand together and unite, always and especially in times of crisis. The tragedy of Surfside is not yet quantifiable. When the names and faces of the victims are released, there will not be a Jew in America who is not touched personally. Everyone will know someone who knows someone, and the bigger the impact will affect every single person who lives in an apartment building, not just in South Florida and in Miami area. Everywhere, anyone who lives in an apartment building will be affected. This should never happen again. Families of victims will mourn. We can give them some comfort by standing with them and by working to make certain that buildings won't collapse on anyone else. Letting them know that these tragic deaths have made an impact, that these lives, taken so brutally and so senselessly, will be remembered for generations. This is how the Jerusalem Post editorial begins. It was natural that Israel should send a rescue mission to help in the aftermath of the Surfside disaster in Florida. Diaspora Affairs Minister Nachman Shai departed on Saturday night to the area where the building collapsed on Thursday, leaving more than 150 missing and most likely dead. The building is in an area with a high Jewish population, and a large number of the missing and their families are Jews. The Jerusalem Post here explains Shai's role, or at least how Shai perceives his role as Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs. The editorial continues. En route to Miami, Shai told the Jerusalem Post, "We will do whatever we can to help the Americans in any way they deem fit. America can learn from Israeli experience. Unfortunately, we have too much experience with disasters." Shai rightly noted that his visit sends a powerful message about the relationship between Israel and American Jewry being a two-way street. The Jerusalem Post now writes that this vision is also the vision of the new Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. They write in their editorial the following. This is a message also being embraced by the Prime Minister. On Friday, Bennett tweeted, "We are following with concern the difficult images that are coming out of Florida. Our foreign ministry representatives in Miami and Israel are doing everything possible to assist and address the situation." The Jerusalem Post editorial goes on to describe the Israeli team that came to help, as they put it. Teams from Zaka, specializing in the identification of bodies in disaster situations, of the United Hatzalah Psychotrauma and Crisis Response Unit, are among those who have also flown to Florida to help and are working alongside volunteers from Magen David Adom's international unit. El Al's, Israel's national airline, sponsored the flights. We are all proud of Israel and that Israel has helped out and helped all over the world. And the editorial highlights the bona fides of just one member leading the group. Here's what they write. The PCRU mission will be led by Vice President of Operations for United Hatzalah, Dov Mazal, who has led disaster response missions to Nepal, Haiti, and Japan. A reminder that Israelis have helped out in many disasters around the globe. The editorial concludes by explaining an important rabbinic concept. Yes, a newspaper website discussing an essential rabbinic teaching and value. Here it is. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. All of Israel are responsible for one another, is a basic Jewish tenet. The importance of the principle of Jewish solidarity around the world should not be underestimated. In the wake of the Surfside disaster, this message of solidarity, of course, is not just to the Jewish community, but to the United States as a whole. Israel and the United States are more than allies. They are friends. From Jerusalem, we send our prayers and support and pray that the warm feelings of solidarity between our countries be expressed not only in emergency situations and disasters, but at all times. This Jerusalem Post editorial rings very true, and it is this very essential component in order to develop better relations between the United States and Israel. Next up is a column from AP, and its author is unnamed. The column actually speaks to the new relationship between the United States and Israel that now there is a new set of leaders must develop. This column was also posted on June 27th, 2021. It's entitled, U.S.-Israel Seek to Reset Ties in Post-Trump Netanyahu Era. It's subtitled, Analysis. Biden and Bennett are focused on pragmatic diplomacy rather than dramatic initiatives that risk fomenting opposition at home or distracting from other priorities. With Foreign Minister Yair Lapid tapped as point man to repair tattered relations with ruling Democratic Party. The essence of the column is that during the Trump-Netanyahu era, relations were very good between Washington and Jerusalem, between the United States and Israel. They were very good between the two leaders, but the Democrats were sidelined, and it's now time to reset that relationship. This is how the AP column begins. Hush-hush diplomacy, in-person visits, and a very public no-surprises agreement on Iran. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid were to meet in Rome on Sunday as their new governments look to turn the page on former President Donald Trump and former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose close alliance aggravated partisan divisions within both countries. Now, with Trump sidelined in Florida and Netanyahu leading the opposition, President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Naftali Bennett are focused on pragmatic diplomacy rather than dramatic initiatives that risk fomenting opposition at home or distracting from other priorities. The column explains that the two allies will try to work out differences in private rather than in public. The author continues, the Americans and the Israelis will try to work out differences away from the public, as in Biden's quiet diplomacy when he privately urged Netanyahu to wind down the Israel-Hamas war ahead of a truce that took effect May 21st. At least in the short term, Lapid, a centrist, will be Israel's point man on repairs to the tattered relationship with Biden and the Democrats. The party controls both houses of Congress, but is increasingly divided on Mideast conflict, with progressive members calling for the U.S. to exert more pressure on Israel. I agree with the author, by the way. Even when you disagree with them, by the way, even when they disagree, they should not be so divisive. It should be constructive. The major issue of contention between the two leaders right now is the nuke deal with Iran. And AP synopsizes the problem and the solution. AP writes, topping the agenda in both countries are talks in Vienna over reviving Iran's 2015 accord with world powers to limit Tehran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. Trump, with Netanyahu's backing, pulled the U.S. out of the deal in 2018 and imposed sanctions on the Islamic Republic. Biden promised to restore and expand the agreement. Though opposed to a new accord, Israel's new government seems intent on trying to influence the talks rather than scuttle them altogether. Netanyahu enraged many Democrats when he condemned the very bad deal before a joint session of Congress in 2015. They have a plan that seemed to be working, AP writes. Tamping down tensions, or at least not inflaming them, is a key strategy, the officials said. For example, Bennett is a religious nationalist who supports settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank, but he risks losing his job if he alienates his dovish coalition partners. So far, the reset seems to be functioning, but with the coalition barely 2 weeks old, significant challenges loom. The Palestinian issue is another sticky point for the two parties, that is, for the United States and Israel. And the AP column puts it very clearly. They ask, but the United States has yet to explain how it intends to bring that about without ending Israel's half-century military rule of the West Bank, its blockade on Hamas-ruled Gaza, and policies in Jerusalem that fueled a spring of unrest. On the Israeli side, making peace with the Democrats appears to be more urgent priority. They are angry, Lapid said, as he took the helm of the foreign ministry. We need to change the way we work with them. It's too early for any of us to know what will happen, but we will certainly keep watch. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 8 memes today, and cartoons, mostly cartoons. Many of them deal with returning back to normal, or as I often say, our new normal. This seems to be an overarching theme in many cartoonists' minds over the past few weeks, because I see it all over the place. In this case, a boss is talking to a worker sitting at his computer. The employee says, "The thing is, I kind of got used to working this way during the pandemic." The boss says, "Yeah, I'm going to have to get you to go ahead and put on your pants." That's very funny. Next up is a sad take on the gun violence confronting major cities. A young boy hears bang, bang, pop, pop, and asks his mother, "Mom, listen, are those fireworks?" And she says, "I sure hope so," while she's reading an article about gun violence on the computer. You can't get around just how dramatic the gun violence is. This cartoon is a perfect parental dilemma. What does a parent do when their child curses for the first time? The child is in the corner, and the mother tells the father, "Guess who said his first constitutionally protected Supreme Court approved First Amendment free speechy word today?" That is a dilemma. Now, a comment about the economy and the record number of older vehicles on the U.S. roads. They're there because the economy is just so difficult. Fred Flintstone from the Flintstones is in his car, and an officer from the modern world is citing him with ticket violations. The cartoon reads, "No lights, no seatbelts, no brakes." And at the bottom of the cartoon it reads, "Apologies to Hanna-Barbera." Next up is a clerk and an exasperated shopper. She sputters and shouts because she can't get her credit card to work. The clerk says, "I'm glad we're keeping the plastic shields." He's protected by these plastic shields. It's crazy. In this cartoon, a person is seen removing a fake background, and he says, "Taking down the fake background, I'm going back to the office." That's what's happening. People are going back to their offices. Traffic is coming back to the city. The next cartoon shows how threats against the United States have advanced. Panel 1 has a missile silo. This missile is in the silo itself. It reads, "Yesterday's Russian threat." The second panel is a computer geek in the silo working on a computer that reads, "Ransomware attack." And the sign reads, "Today's Russian threat," a theme that we talked about earlier. Finally, the question arises about vaccines, and our vaccines in general. How long are they good for, and will we need boosters? The cartoon reads, "Doctors say we may need regular vaccine booster shots." The technician gives the man a punch card filled with holes. He says, "I'll just punch your card, and with your next vaccine, you get a free latte." That's what it might be coming to. We might have to get boosters every 6 months or a year. These cartoons are very funny because they poke real fun at real life situations. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. You get bitcoins through mining. In order to mine, you use computers, very powerful computers, mind you. And these computers answer questions, solve problems, and get new coins by doing that. It turns out Iran is very big as a Bitcoin miner. And because the computers mining the Bitcoins are so powerful, extremely powerful, they drain huge amounts of electricity. Iran has shut down several cryptocurrency mining operations. In effect, Iranian authorities seized 7,000 powerful computers that were being used to mine Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's not the only one. Analytics about these currencies show that 4.5% of all Bitcoin mining takes place in Iran. If this is true, it translates to hundreds of millions of unrestricted dollars that Iran has. Iranian leadership seized 7,000 computers because they feared that the mining of the computers would cause power shortages throughout the country. A Russian naval ship shot at a British naval ship in the Black Sea. The Russians also scrambled a jet and launched several bombs, missiles, towards the British ship. The boat, called the HMS Defender, is a destroyer. Russia explained, saying that they attacked the Defender because it crossed into Russian waters. The British denied the claim, by the way. The Russians countered, saying that the British ship was as far as 2 nautical miles into Russian waters. Britain went so far as to deny everything, even that the Russian ship shot at them. According to the UK Ministry of Defence, and I'm quoting here, no warning shots have been fired at the HMS Defender. The Royal Navy ship is conducting innocent passage through Ukrainian territorial waters in accordance with international law, unquote. As usual, the Russians are flexing their muscles. For anyone worried that Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett went soft by joining the coalition that made him Prime Minister, you could probably put that worry aside for the moment. In addition to bombing Gaza almost immediately after he took office, when Hamas sent balloons which caused wildfires and tremendous destruction in Israel, the new Prime Minister also gave the order for a recent attack by the Mossad on Iran's centrifuge factories. I mentioned them earlier. Of course, Israel has neither confirmed nor denied the Iranian attack, but they've hinted that they're behind it. Bennett also approved new settlement construction in Elkanah, Mishur Adumim, and Yizhar, 3 major sites. The new construction in these Jewish settlements on the West Bank is the first such move okayed by the government of the new Prime Minister. The subcommittee on settlement in the civilian administration actually made the decision to build and sent it on to the Prime Minister for approval. The committee, which normally convenes every 3 months, has not actually met since January. The Prime Minister, new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, has been kept very busy in his first few days in office. The Embassy of Honduras has opened in Jerusalem. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez came to Jerusalem to be part of the celebration, and it was a celebration. At the opening, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said, "This is another demonstration of the deep friendship and deep connection between the two countries," unquote. Joining the president were a great many of his ministers and aides from Honduras. The Honduran foreign minister was there to sign the memorandum of understanding with the Israeli foreign minister, new foreign minister, Yair Lapid. The memorandum of understanding, the MOU, contained the decision by the two countries to collaborate in fields of agriculture, water resource management, health, education, and information sharing. This is another example of Israel's improving foreign relations. Israel continues to raise its status in the world. The decision by the United States to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to move its own embassy there has been anything but an impediment for other countries. Israel permitted the entry into Gaza of fuel trucks. The trucks were permitted to enter in order to fill Gaza's electrical stations, which had not been producing electricity. They had gone dark. The fuel is paid by Qatar. Ironically, permission was granted the same day that Israel received a formal request from Gaza to permit 10 trucks of fuel entry. Israel had made the decision before the request even came through. Israel has also relaxed towards Gaza in other ways. They are permitting the importing of raw material necessary for civilian purposes. And even earlier, Israel extended the Gaza fishing zone from another 6 nautical miles, permitting Gazans to fish an extended 9 nautical miles into the Mediterranean Sea. Qatar is asking that Israel permit their monetary aid to be transferred into Gaza. That has yet to happen. It's still unclear where the money will go and how it will be supervised. So Israel's not going to allow that yet. In daily meetings with Egypt, Israel together discusses the hows of how to make certain that the money goes to the proper places and not to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The United States carried out an airstrike, or several airstrikes, against Iranian-supported forces in Iraq and Syria recently. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said that the attacks were approved by President Biden, who also said, quote, directed further military action to disrupt and deter, unquote, attacks on the United States, facilities, and United States personnel in Iraq. According to the official U.S. statement, and here it is, we are in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq for the sole purpose of assisting the Iraqi security forces in their efforts to defeat ISIS. The United States took necessary, appropriate, and deliberate action designed to limit the risk of escalation, but also to send a clear, unambiguous deterrent message, unquote. The official Iraqi military response, by the way, condemned the United States and its action. The Iraqi condemnation was to be expected. What was not expected was the U.S. strike. Over the last few months, Iranian proxies have been increasingly aggressive and attacking U.S. personnel in the region using drones. The United States needed to respond, and this was the best response. When Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid met with his U.S. counterpart, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, in Vienna, Lapid indicated that Israel had made a serious mistake by alienating Democrats in the United States. Both Lapid and the new Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, are committed to improving and even strengthening the relationship between the United States and Israel, a relationship which is so important that it should be above U.S. party politics. Israeli Foreign Minister Lapid also made it clear that Israel is unhappy with the United States for advances being made towards Iran in resurrecting the 2015 nuke deal. Before the meeting began, Lapid said, and I'm quoting here, Israel has some serious reservations about the Iran nuclear deal that is being put together in Vienna. We believe the way to discuss those disagreements is through direct and professional conversations, not in press conferences. Biden has said to Israel and to the world that Iran will never become nuclear on his watch. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Earlier, the Jerusalem Post editorial quoted a rabbinic concept. Did you know that the quote, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh, is actually found in the Gemara on page 31a of the Talmudic tractate Shavuot? The concept, as discussed in the Talmud, and as it applies today, refers to both individual Jews and Jews as a group. The notion is that there is a need to help others, a need for individuals to help other individuals, and for groups to help other groups. This is no small commitment. It means that we have a great responsibility to communities and to members of the communities. We are obligated to help people. Let's take this rabbinic decree seriously. Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.